some examples of mediation in foreign policy. Lula was helping Brazil to lead the bloc of emerging countries in the Doha round of world trade talks known as IBSA, India, Brazil, and South Africa. He's been a leader in the group of emerging economies known as BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. You can ask Dan about that. He's been instrumental in trying to set up a variety of regional initiatives, including a new regional security council, the South American Defense Council. He's been negotiating between Venezuela and Colombia on combating drug production and trafficking, as well as working on various bilateral and multilateral fronts to strengthen trade integration. He's been pressing Obama to improve relations with Venezuela and Cuba, and most famously, he's been lobbying for permanency for Brazil on the UN Security Council, as well as on the WTO and the World Bank. So all of this shows Lula's ambition in projecting Brazil as a political and economic leader on the regional and the global stage. In fact, Susan has a great story about the evolution of class pictures of the G20, where Lula moves, or the Brazil moves from the background to Lula right in the middle. The U.S. kind of right in the recedes to the background. Now, this fits in with another of my theories about Lula, in addition to the mediator story, is that he was a nationalist before he was a socialist, if you go back to his early labor days, and I think that that's what's coming to the forefront here. So what about domestically? Now, he's gotten a lot of praise for an innovative program known as Bolsa Familia. I think Susan's going to talk about this, which he gives, the government gives cash payments to poor families, conditional on responsibility for keeping their kids in school and providing some basic health care. He's expanded the production of biofuels. Brazil is now the world's leading producer of ethanol, has been needling Washington to drop the U.S. Subsidies to U.S. corn-based ethanol producers. And he's presided over an expansion of higher education, opening many more public universities and giving broader access to education. Now that was something I definitely noticed there when I was in Sao Paulo for a short trip in August. There was a much commented on big new public university just opening up that they're constructing in the poor eastern zone of Sao Paulo. Now, there are also some things that are a bit more problematic, are having some mixed effects. Basic and secondary education is still very weak. Lula wants to use the new money that he's gotten from this recent discovery of a huge oil field to build more schools and improve basic education, but still a weak point. The environment, he's been trying to develop a market-oriented approach that's balancing development with conservation, talking about using money from carbon markets to pay off or develop alternative livelihoods for would-be deforesters, and he's gotten a lot of criticism from environmentalists that the infrastructure and development projects will actually encourage further deforestation. This contributed to the resignation of his environment minister last year. Is that last year? Last year?
Yeah.
Right. He has surprisingly strong military ambitions. Brazil has dramatically expanded the defense budget. It's jumped from $3 to $5 billion in the past year or two, just the past couple of years. They're building new weapon systems, they're negotiating with France on the construction of a nuclear submarine, all of which is somewhat odd because of the fact that Brazil has no real conceivable enemies. It's seen as a deterrent from intimidation. So not a deterrent from a threat, but a deterrent from the possibility of intimidation, sometime in the future. But it kind of shows again Brazil's ambition here, and as well as seen as helping them combat drug cartels, protecting the Amazon, and protecting these newly discovered oil fields. Now, while crime rates seem to be declining, I think the murder rate dropped in Sao Paulo by 78% since 1999, but still there's tremendous violence in the cities. The New York Times recently had an article about the boom in armored car sales in Sao Paulo, and on my last trip to Brazil, even progressive middle-class professor types were worried about their kids being kidnapped, which is something that I didn't see there 20 years ago. And they're currently building a wall a literal wall in Rio separating the kind of upper middle class housing developments from the favelas. So actually kind of walling off. You saw that big project from the, not PT government, but from the, an allied government, in fact. How am I on time?
About a
Couple minutes, okay. So now a couple other stories. This is by way of an overview of the kinds of things that are happening in Brazil. I was there in August, and I got a chance to look at some of the, or go back and contact some of the my friends from my fellowship years, as well as some of the youth activists I knew from my fellowship and dissertation research. And I just thought it was kind of interesting to catch up with them. Some of the activists in the Workers' Party that were involved in the kind of grassroots, intersecting grassroots partisan popular movement, church-based networks that I talked about yesterday, they have been, this was the grassroots wing of the party. They've been through 5 campaigns for Lula, but when I got together with a bunch of them in the Zona Leste, in the East Zone, I found them quite isolated and disconnected, really minimally engaged in politics. It's kind of interesting, kind of frustrated, and somewhat disillusioned, very disillusioned with the corruption scandal in Brazil that I can say a few words about later. If you're interested, they're kind of seeing some of their leaders as being just like the worst of the right wing, even though they were still proud of many of the things that Lula was able to accomplish, and especially, I think, proud of the foreign policy, but still, with a little bit of a bitter taste in their mouth from the corruption experience. Some of the leaders from, let's say, the highly pragmatic Communist Party of Brazil, which is allied with the PT, the former president of the National Student Union, who plays a big role in my book, is now Lula's sports minister and presided over the Pan American Games, and many other student leaders that I know are working as his aides in the Ministry of Sports. And when I was in a street fair in Sao Paulo, I ran into another former student leader from the Social Democratic Party, that's the Cardoso's party, and he was in the process of running for city council as the candidate of youth. And so you can see kind of diverse trajectories of them. Some of them disarticulated, isolated, others becoming professionalized, going into the government, or into the opposition. So I also have some thoughts on the corruption scandal, but I can talk about that later if you're interested. So to conclude, Lula he's accomplished a lot. There's still a lot to do in Brazil. And then I'll end with another quote from the Council of Hemispheric Affairs. They say that for years, Brazil has been considered the country of the future. And as I say in Brazil, Brazil is the country of the future, sempre do futuro. Brazil is the country of the future, always in the future. But now it's positioning itself as the country of the moment, as the United States looks to the south for its new hemispheric partner. Now, what that partnership will be like, I think I'll leave it to Raphi to explore, so I think he's going to talk about the link between Lula and Obama.
At the end of my fellowship in 2000, I was on bed rest because I just found out that I was pregnant with my son, Nicholas. And the doctors there put me on bed rest, and so all of our friends came to the place where we were. We were sort of just crashing in a friend's house, getting ready to pack up and come back. And that was during the Bush-Gore election and the recount. And all of our friends, and it was sort of this parade of people coming to say goodbye to us, packed into this living room, or I would lie down in a hammock outside, and it was, first of all, I was constantly being berated that it was the end of the U.S. empire of colonial dominance. That was before 9/11 even. And the Italians in particular loved to say that to us. There were 2 worries. One was that George Bush was going to win, and if George Bush won, they would lose all funding for all programs. USAID was going to dry up and wither away. There would never be another social program funded. But if Al Gore won, the United States was going to essentially annex the Amazon. So I think that something that's changed in the Lula era is that Brazilians don't look to the outside for the definition of what Brazil is. And I really think that that's a strong change. And in alluding to the pragmatism that Ann was speaking about, Lula, he did come from humble man origins and was an inspiration to everyone. And people were big supporters of him before he was even running for the presidency. But he has an incredible pragmatic streak and has made sure that the momentum that was growing in the 90s and the early 2000s on the world stage for Brazil has remained front and center.